begin our journey eastward to get back home in Ohio, we left the St. Mary Campground at Glacier National Park on July 14, 2023. Our next major stop was the Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. We headed southeast on US 89 through Great Falls, then east for an overnight stay at Mountain Acres RV in Lewistown, Montana. The next morning, we continued our eastward drive through rural Montana on Montana 200. The rolls of hay lined both sides of the highway for hundreds of miles in preparation for feeding the cattle over the winter. The worst of the drive on Montana 200 was the thousands of large grasshoppers that jumped into our pathway. When we arrived at Theodore Roosevelt National Park, our motorhome was an absolute mess. I spent most of the morning at the campground washing the front end and side wings of the motorhome. We were not done with them at the campground either. They were everywhere, including in our screen tent. Sue captured a photo for our memories. We stayed 3 nights at the Cottonwood Campground in the national park. When we arrived, we set up and relaxed at the campsite after the long 2-day drive across Montana. The next day, we decided to spend some time in the city of Medora. We first visited the South Unit Visitor Center, then spent the afternoon exploring the city, including a late lunch. For the evening, we went to the Medora Musical, a highly recommended live show celebrating the history of Medora, Teddy Roosevelt, and the historic American West. On our 3rd day, we traveled the Scenic Loop Drive around the park. We began by turning left out of the campground along the Little Missouri River. We quickly ran into a herd of buffalo which held up traffic. We then headed to the Wind Canyon Trail where we got out and took a short walk. There was a great overlook there of the river and canyons. We then stopped at Boicourt Overlook where we had a beautiful view for lunch. We knew the loop road was closed for construction near Buck Hill Trail, so we turned around there and retraced our drive. When we reached where the herd of buffalo were, we were surprised to find they had completely disappeared. We drove on to the Skyline Vista, then to a flat area called Prairie Dog Metropolis where we found acres of prairie dogs. And just down the road from there, before crossing over the highway, we found a band of wild horses, including a pony. We then returned to our campsite for the evening, happy that we made this stop to see Medora and the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Theodore Roosevelt meant it was time to get some miles behind us and leave the West. We drove across North Dakota and stopped at the National Buffalo Museum in Jamestown, North Dakota, where we saw the world's largest buffalo. We stayed overnight at the museum as Harvest Host members. The next morning, we headed across to Fargo and then north before going east into Minnesota. Just into Minnesota, we passed through Halstead, where we saw the world's largest sugar beet. Continuing east into Minnesota, we drove by the headwaters of the Mississippi that wasn't more than 10 feet wide. We stopped overnight at an Army Corps of Engineers campground at Leech Lake. From there, we continued southeast towards Duluth. We crossed into Superior, Wisconsin, and stopped there for groceries. Our next stop would be Copper Falls State Park, where we stayed to relax for 2 days after traveling almost 750 miles from Theodore Roosevelt National Park. At Copper Falls, we explored the park, but we were somewhat restricted in hiking since Cassie was not allowed on the primary trail, the North Country Scenic Trail. On the second day, Sue and I did take a fairly easy 2-mile hike to see Copper Falls and Brownstone Falls. The hike was a combination of the North Country Scenic Trail and Doughboys Loop Trail. We enjoyed walking along the Bad River with views of the many falls. The best one yet, I think. Isn't that funny? What I said, Copper Falls came down this direction, and then this is Brownstone Falls, it's going down this direction, and then they all go to the right. We originally planned to stay at Copper Falls for 3 days. With the mosquitoes, the rainy and gray weather, and not much more for us to do, we decided to leave a day early. We were looking forward to our next stop, Door County, Wisconsin, nicknamed the Cape Cod of the Midwest. We headed south on Wisconsin 13 to US 8, and then to US 51 to Wisconsin 29, which took us over to Green Bay. We were able to book the Door County KOA for one night. The next morning, we got up and headed to Peninsula State Park along Lake Michigan, where we stayed for 3 days. For our drive from the Door County KOA to Peninsula State Park, we stopped to stock up on some cheese at Renard's Cheese, stopped at Shartner's Farm Market for fresh fruits and vegetables, and then had a patio lunch and stocked up on beer and wine at Lautenbach's Orchard Country Winery and Market. We finished our drive by mid-afternoon and arrived at Peninsula State Park, where we stayed at the Tennyson Bay Campground. At Peninsula State Park, there is a lot to do not only at the park, but also the immediate area. Surrounded by Lake Michigan, Door County has 300 miles of shoreline, so you're never far away from water for boating, kayaking, fishing, and other water sports. There are 5 state parks, thousands of acres of wilderness to hike and ride bikes, and dozens of beaches. Combine that with waterfront dining, local wineries and breweries, arts and crafts, and lakeside communities, this was clearly a Great Lakes getaway. We spent one afternoon driving around to see the area, including Sister Bay and Ephraim. We then drove to Fish Creek and walked around this quaint town, enjoying the waterfront setting. We found a restaurant that welcomed Cassie and had a nice lunch on the outside patio. Back at the state park, we enjoyed relaxing at our very private campsite surrounded by trees and other vegetation. Sue was able to be a lazy photographer as the birds were flying in and out of our campsite. She captured some great pictures sitting in her chair, including a hairy woodpecker and a female American redstart. The redstart is a very lively warbler that Sue and I have never seen before. We also took some easy hikes from our campsite. Cassie loved it here. Unlike the national parks we had visited over the last 2 months, she was allowed to hike everywhere with us. We took one hike by the Northern Sky Theater Park Amphitheater, which hosts outdoor musicals and plays throughout the summer, and then went on over to Nicollet Beach, a state-run beach with a picnic area, camp store, and boat and bike rentals. Another hike was up to the Eagle Bluff Lighthouse. Again, a very relaxing and easy hike, and of course Cassie joined us. We really enjoyed Peninsula State Park in Door County. If we are ever in this area again, we will definitely make this a stopping point and may actually stay a little longer to take advantage of everything this area has to offer. we left Peninsula State Park in Door County, we were looking forward to getting home after our long journey. We headed southwest down the peninsula towards Green Bay, then south on Interstate 43 to Kohler Andre State Park along Lake Michigan. Our original plan was to stay there 2 nights, but upon arrival we decided to leave the next day. In the morning, we left not looking forward to going through Milwaukee and Chicago. We continued south on 43 and then Interstate 94. Getting through Milwaukee wasn't bad, but taking the 294 bypass around Chicago was a mess. It was very slow going with construction and very heavy traffic. We eventually got around Chicago and headed east on 94 to US 35, arriving at Potato Creek State Park for an overnight stay. The next morning, we took US 30 across Indiana and into Ohio, then traveling south through familiar farms and cornfields of Ohio. We finally reached home, ending our 2-month, 5,300-mile adventure. What a fabulous journey! We have so many great memories as we traveled through 10 states and visited several national parks, national monuments, and state parks. Glacier National Park was the pinnacle of our visits, but there was so much more. The Badlands, the Black Hills of South Dakota, the Grand Tetons, and the beauty of the entire state of Idaho. Also the state parks in Indiana, Wisconsin, and South Dakota. We had so many great stops along the way. It's a trip that Sue and I will remember and cherish forever. With our 7 travel videos and hundreds of pictures, we have captured our memories of this great Mountain West trip. We have shared these memories and hope you have enjoyed them. As we continue our travels, we will share our experiences on our YouTube channel, Dave and Sue Travels.